the rules. Yeah, take a seat in the front row.
Well, it's 6:55.
Hello, hello. Oh, I can hear me.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
That's good.
Must speak so quiet. Hello.
Hello.
Right.
You're not just talking to me. You are talking to me. You're talking to them.
Right. Yes.
Our copious amounts of people.
Do we need to have the sheets in front of us?
No.
No. Okay.
I do. You do.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yes, it will be online, yeah.
You know what? I'm popping one.
Okay.
It's already, I can already feel it happening, the tickle that I didn't have 10 minutes ago. Right in here. Cheek.
Are we good with the sound check? Awesome.
Okay.
Okay. We're still on. Jaiwei, could you mute us for until we start? Thank you. I think we're 2, 3, and 4.
Well, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our Cathedral chat, both to those of you who are here in person and to those who are joining us online. It is good that you are here. You need me to speak up a bit? You can't hear? Is that better? That's better, good. No, we've been running Cathedral chat off and on for a couple of years now, and we see this as part of our role as a cathedral to host public forums on contentious issues. And in the area we're looking at, to come and share some of their ideas from which we engage in discussion. So Monica, I think next Cathedral Chat is in January. Sign-up sheet is if you want to be included on an email distribution list, informed of when that's. I'd like on your behalf to thank very much Climate Justice Cathedral, our chair, Jim Newman, is so I mentioned he's watching us on Jim, and Sue Carson is here from Climate Justice Niagara, so thank you very much too for your support. Just some basic housekeeping. Washrooms are located, and then I suggest if you need to use a washroom, please see someone at the back. We'll be offering coffee and refreshments after the Q&A session. So, we have this evening with Ginny and Emily. Ginny Arnott-Wood. Ginny, you've been a financial advisor for a long time, 7 years, I think, and you hold a certified financial planning designation and the investment manager designation as well. So that qualifies you to be a licensed discretionary manager, I think. You spent the first 20 years of your career with a bank-owned securities firm, and you've now moved into your own practice in James' office in Burlington. And along with providing traditional financial services, you've become more and more interested in sustainable and socially responsible investments. I think you have certification now as a responsible specialist through the Responsible Association of Canada. So there's now credentialing for this subspecialty, I guess, within your field. So you help your clients to build wealth at the same time as working towards a better and more sustainable world. Mm-hmm. Now your team now includes your daughter, Emily, and you joined 2021. So you have both the experience of a boomer and of a millennial with which to kind of bless and benefit your clients. And Emily, you were at Western, BA English Language and Literature. You developed a passion, I think, for sustainability during your time on the peninsula working at a certified sustainable vineyard. Is that correct? Yes. And so you left the wine industry for another challenge and transitioned into the financial up with Mark at Raymond James. And you're also a licensed financial advisor. So you have a variety of work experience, and you bring that into your work with your clients to help them build the kind of portfolios that is going to best meet their needs. Our beloved Monica, the assistant curate here, Monica Roma-Green, is our facilitator for this evening. I think, how many, would this be number 3 facilitated, Mon? I think number 3, yeah. And you've done a bang-up job at the other 2, so we're looking forward to draw out on a passion. So thank you very much, and I think without over to you.
Tim, ladies, come and join me, please. Thank you, Tim. And thank you so much to Climate Justice Cathedral and Climate Justice Night. So this chat is going to last until about 8. Then we'll transition at that point to a Q&A. And this Q&A is not just for the room, it's also going to be for folks online. So watching online, please know that if you have a question that comes up while we're talking, you have the gift of typing that in the chat, and by the magic of texting, I'll have it up here on my phone, and I'll be able to include your questions in the Q&A. So you can do that throughout the evening or when we're doing the Q&A. So we will try and get to as many questions as we can. The first time I ever had to include a disclaimer before we begin. Because of the topic at hand, it's important that we make very clear that the information provided in this discussion is believed to be reliable. However, we can't present that it is accurate or complete. The discussion is provided as a general source of information and considered personal investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any securities, okay? The views expressed are those of these two advisors and not work for or necessarily of the Cathedral. So terms, I think we can begin with our discussion tonight. So thank you both for being here. First, I'd like to hear sort of, we know that you're in this financial wealth, and area that affects you personally. So first.
Came working as an advisor at my previous firm, and had been doing it for about 16 or 17 years. And then in 2016, this isn't to be a political comment, the truth, this is how it honestly came about. 2016, Donald Trump was elected, and I was, like many people, very surprised and so forth. And Emily was a fourth-year student at Western at that point, and I called her at some stage that day. Her comments to me were, "Oh, Mom, what are we gonna do? I mean, it's just, you know, this is a liberal arts major, living with a lot of, or with the other, so, you know, lamenting this very strange event, you know." So anyway, a conversation about, well, what you do is you just continue, you know, press progressive views, you know, all of the things that you believe in, and just, I mean, that's all we can do as individuals. And I got off the phone and I thought, because I was at work, what do I do for a living? I guide people's investments. And I thought, I wonder if that whole ethical investment thing, which that was, you know, I could look at more. So I online and I typed in like ethical investments, and up popped the Responsible Investment Association of Canada website. Looked into it and I thought, wow, things have really changed.
Wow.
Since I first started in the business. Is so much more data available, so much more information now that made it possible to start evaluating investments with a lens, not only the usual that we would to get a decent rate of return, but also looking at things through the lens of, well, we call it in many respects ES, environmental, social, and governance issues. So that broad area. But anyway, it's how I got started looking at this area. And the more I learned about it and the more I got into it, the more I thought, this is the way forward. Wow. And it gave me something new and positive to talk to clients about over and above. And at that point, maybe 10% of the advisors in Canada that were even looking at this. Wow. It wasn't something that my clients were aware of, time, and so it sort of evolved from there. But yeah, that's how it came about.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think all of us have these moments where we think, well, what can I do? And what a great way of saying, oh wait, this is something that I could do.
Right.
How about you, Emily? What were you drawn to?
You know, certainly being inspired by my mom's pivot to more focused, you know, look into ethical investments. But, you know, as Tim mentioned, I used to work at a sustainable winery in Niagara, and of my first glimpse into the relation between, you know, sustainable practices and I first buy into the whole concept that, you know, sustainable focus will, you know, tends to yield better tasting fruit and results in general. So that was kind of my first glimpse into it. But then, you know, the reality is I'm 29. I left on this planet, and I, you know, like many of my peers, you know, air quality and access to natural. So I feel change because again, I'm going to be here for a long time. Hopefully, I'll have a family one day, and I want, you know, quality of life for my future and grandchildren. And so I just feel like like my mom, I want to do what I can.
That's wonderful. I think it's so interesting that you started with an actual, like, this kind of actually bears actual fruit.
That's right. That's right.
Like real fruit. And now you're the metaphor. I mean, this is the area you work in. So what exactly is this? Is it just concerned about environmental issues? Is it using our money to create better fruit? What exactly is it?
So when I first started looking at it, and you know, we were calling it broadly responsible investing, and then ESG was sort of underneath. That's what we kind of broke it down into.
Right. So say what those are again.
Environmentally sustainable, socially responsible, and good governance practices. So those are, and they're broad, and within those, they can be subdivided maybe, you know, 50 ways. Each of those things have different area that you can use to evaluate you know, how a company or an investment stacks up. So that's loosely how it's.
Right. So
yeah.
It's not just environmental.
That's right.
It's even broader.
That's right.
Did you want to add anything?
Just to give examples, when we talk about, you know, socially responsible, are there, you know, DEI, diversity, equity, operations represent words? What is the disparity between CEO pay and employee pay when it comes to governance? So E tends to be the thing that we think of the most, but the S and the G are just as important, if not, because they're so it's as broad as ESG is as a framework. They go to very specific examples within the framework.
Yeah, I didn't even think you just three very simple about all those things.
Absolutely.
But I wouldn't have thought to like do due diligence to look those things, right? So that's a good question. How do you screen these investments for sustainable qualities? Like, how do you know that these are the ones you want to invest in?
Well, certainly with clients who don't have a lot of money to invest, mutual is a very popular place to go, but mutual funds are a little tricky because you don't necessarily know what companies are contained within this kind of larger basket of securities, and just simply, you know, as we'd say, lift the hood and check to see what individual companies are mutual funds to really verify if you align with where your money is going. So certainly in the case of mutual funds, look at the top 10 holdings, seeing if there are, you know, guys in the bunch, but also, you know, just asking questions. If you're a pension plan employer, how your pension, and getting curious about you know, what your money support and whether it resonates with you and your values.
That's wonderful.
The other thing I was going to, tradition of responsible investment or sustainable investing, so no tobacco, no guns, no pornography, kinds of things, maybe oil and gas, fossil fuels, that sort of thing. So exclude, and which is fine. That's one certainly to screen. But now, because we have so much more data available to us, we can screen for positive screening. So what are the kinds of, you know, what are the ways that companies solve problems to move us forward towards a more sustainable future? So the positive screening, I think, certainly many choices of, you know, how you can screen for, depending on what you're most interested in. And, to my mind, that's the real, because it's something that is going to help us all, you know, problems, as opposed to just, you know, not or just excluding certain kinds of companies. Yeah.
Like, we're going to hold from these people.
That's right.
Exactly.
We're going to actually try and figure out support. Is it important for like the investor to know what those values are for themselves?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the important thing too is that what is sustainable to me might not be sustainable to you, and really focusing on what, you know, also thematic investing, where you can really zero in on investments that do very specific things like improve water quality or, you know, increase the white rhino population. Like, really, depending on what you care about, there is probably an investment that is making that kind of their priority.
Like that specific?
That specific,
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. So sustainable investing does sound like it's good for the planet. This is, we're looking to positive. We're looking to move away from the negative and the positive. But what's the financial choice? Because they're wanting a good return. Do they have to sacrifice in order to, yeah.
Well, that's probably the big and most common we get asked, because after all, when people come to us, they certainly, you know, this isn't on their money. And the good news is that there's been enough sustainable investing, you know, done over enough years now that they can confirm that sustainable investing over the long run tends to do at least as well, if better, than investments where that screening is done. And one of the ways that that happens is, in general, if this sort of subset, if you have the universe of, say, profitable companies that you might choose to invest in Canada and the US or globally, and they've all got good track records as far as earnings and all the things we look at for that purpose. Beyond that, the subset that can be screened for, you know, what kind of corporate do they play, do they, you know, do they follow through on what they say they do, all those kinds of things. A screen for quality as much as it is anything else. So over the long run, those, you know, companies that into those things, in general, stay out of trouble. So often a risk mitigation as much as anything.
Wow. And
And that in itself can, sometimes you make money by losing money. I mean, at certain times, it may just be because your company a headline that caused people to say, uh-oh, don't want that, I'm out. Wow. So sometimes that's, you know, one of the factors that makes it over the long run, makes these investments that do well as doing good.
so that's so interesting that by aiming for all of these positive you're actually gaining a positive outcome.
Exactly.
Funny that.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to this point?
Just the risk mitigation, I think, is the biggest way to convert folks who, are not necessarily on the responsible investing, sustainable investing train yet. They're still really concerned about returns, again, the bottom line. And really, again, reinforcing the fact that this is an extra screen of an extra layer of due diligence for all of the reasons that you mentioned: reputational risk, regulatory risk, approach to their, services to be more sustainable. Their and legal push that would happen if they weren't, again, being proactive about it. So the risk mitigation piece, I think, to me, is the most.
Wow. So then, here's an interesting question. I keep thinking of this, and this is the next question on the thing, is how can people their investments are sustainable? But I think part of it is there's so much like greenwashing going on, and people making themselves sound like they're doing good things. So that's kind of, I'm going to throw that in there with this question. Yeah. How do you know? Like, do you guys know that, and I can just trust you, or do my own homework?
Well, one of the reasons that this area of investing has been somewhat fraught is because, first of all, there are criteria you can look at to determine if something is sustainable. Say too, there are no perfect companies, right? Everybody, it's more about what direction are they moving in? Are they making an effort here, and is it measurable, and is it, a sustainable effort? And the other difficulty traditionally was there wasn't a standard metric you could use to compare and to hold people's feet to the fire, were. And so, and it is one of the criticisms of the area too, is that, well, measure this stuff and it changes over time. And that's true. It is one of the areas that we are aware we want to try to improve. So the Investment Association of Canada, for example, is working towards a taxonomy to make it for us to have a more a better yardstick, as it were, to manage companies against. They're not the only organization that is doing that. There are several globally that are doing that. So it is becoming harder and harder for companies to greenwash because there are enough people looking and enough ways to actually measure and mostly follow, to make sure that they're following through on the commitments they're making, if they're making commitments. And that's part of the issue. Are you making a commitment? And if so, what are you doing? And are you achieving those posts along the way? So it's getting harder for companies to greenwash relative to when things started.
At least when it comes to the investment side, not necessarily to side. Not a lot, right?
That's true.
Yeah, but you're talking about these are the kind of things that investors and folks like you are.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Europe is miles ahead of us in terms of disclosure and making it mandatory and creating more of a template for consistency, for ratings, for, again, disclosure and catch-up rate. So it's, it's not disclosure in Canada yet. That's coming for that exact reason, so that we, greenwashing won't be as much. Certainly, if the websites of, any, typical company, there's probably going to be where they're talking about potentially a chief sustainability officer or their general annual, they're, talking about the specific sustainability, but exactly, you can still say that and not follow through. So hopefully as this becomes mainstream, that will.
And it's that's part of what we feel as our to looking at companies looking at those metrics beyond the financial, but also the big institutional investors, pension funds, endowment funds. They have very well developed ways of analyzing. So it's to those of us who do that work every day to try to make sure we understand what's going on. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So you mentioned that Europe is ahead of us. So are there ways governments can have a positive or negative impact on moving towards more sustainable
Absolutely.
investing? What would that be?
Yeah, the European Union has actually put in place laws in some cases where, you know, these aren't just nice to have things. Companies, if they want to do business in most of Europe, have to adhere to a lot of very specific, you know, carbon reduction metrics and what on the business that they're in. And whereas in North America, we don't have things that are as strict as we can see in our there are government policy plays a huge part of this. It cannot just be on the backs of to do all and business also to make, you know, to make money. And so to which they maybe have to clean up their act, you know, only public pressure and pressure only goes if they're working in an environment where the government doesn't care. Let's use an example. In Ontario, at one point, electric vehicle subsidy that was provincial as well as a federal subsidy to give you a discount when you bought an electric vehicle. Well, federal subsidy is still in the province of Ontario. And yet, in the last year or so, we hear the government make noise the fact that they're investing huge amounts of money in having lithium battery plants being built in Ontario, which is great. So, I mean, they seem to want to go that way, but that's kind of recent, and the subsidy for individual purchasers is still not there. And there are all governments, that's just one example, but you know, we don't, you know, there's arguments of tax, no carbon tax, does it not work? And that's all at the government level. Yeah. I think that's, like you said, it's not just enough for shareholders, for us to pressure. Like, so we as voters have to demand more, right? Did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think that was pretty well rounded, but certainly, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to this, but it's, you know, it's not night either. I mean, as much as we get excited about EVs and potential subsidies, it's also still such a even if you want to drive an EV, it's certainly not in my price point right now. So, you know, it's going to take time, and certainly government's helping. I would love to buy an EV, and if I had a little bit of a finance to do so, I would work. The reality is, I have a 2010 Acura, and that's what I'm going to be doing for a while, unless we get a little bit of individuals, and certainly the private sector. We can't do it alone.
Yeah, it's going to take all of us with all.
That's right.
It sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had mentioned something earlier, Ginny, when you were talking about the different kinds of investments. You said, and possibly fossil fuels.
Right.
I got a question. Just stop investing in fossil fuels, right? I know we have people out here in the audience that are very adamant investing in fossil fuels, like right?
And many of us do not invest in fossil fuels, which, you know, that's our you know, prerogative. That's the great thing about this approach, is that if this is really important to you, and pay attention fossil fuel free investment, important component. However, this is the trick. It's complicated, especially in this country, given that approximately 20 to 30% of our investable assets or investable opportunities in this country in the oil. A lot of people to just close the tap today and say no more. I don't think any of us here. We still mostly heat our homes with fossil fuel, natural gas. Not everybody, but you know that there is a movement towards you know, electric heat pumps and so forth. But even beef grid, which we need to do in a tremendous way, need are huge. And in some, even Canada, we still use coal for that purpose. So, you know, this is something that it is a transition. I refer to it as the just transition, because you also can't just throw people out of work. Can we retrain them? Great. Can we find, do they have to relocate to another part of the country in order to get work because they can't do it in Alberta? Maybe, you know, all the things that have been so entrenched in our country so long. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it takes political, it takes a lot of money, and it takes, you know, it takes pressure from everybody, whether you're an investor or not. It takes a lot of time and a lot of that's all sort of for this yet. But that's why we're here, is to talk about it and to try to get better educated about what's possible today and what will be possible in the future. Hopefully.
Yeah, just real families and real communities are at stake in terms of being brought along with this transition, nobody behind, because it's going to take everyone to get there. Yeah, just turning the tap off, I think, would really alienate entire communities, certainly in Alberta. And again, they're real at stake who need to know that they're, you know, they can still provide families. So it'll take time for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that, because it is a tricky question.
Yeah.
I was encouraged to hear, though, just recently, like listening, and somebody was on Texas. Like, you think about Texas as like the oil capital of the U.S., and they are the #1 sustainable
Yes, right.
energy as well.
Yes.
It's a both and. They're in the process of trying to figure out how to do a both and.
Exactly.
And hopefully that could be like, I hope that's what we're talking about.
That's right.
And I think the other thing to bear in mind too is, and this isn't to be an apologist for fossil fuel businesses, but I do know that fossil fuel companies in this country, they know the writing is on the wall, and they are not, in previous cycles, you know, they were profitable. They would take profits and then they'd turn around and they'd immediately start exploring and drilling for new wells and so forth. That's not happening. It's happening a little bit, but by and large, it's not happening so much anymore, because this time around, it came that same way of thinking. So they're taking, in many cases, profits, and they are building, they are buying into and acquiring solar. And I think in the long run, you know, Suncor theoretically could become an energy company, necessarily always going to be oil and gas, because they know what's coming, and they all agree, like they understand that this is something that we all have to work towards, you know. So they're not evil. They understand, and they are taking some of what they're making these days and putting it into those areas. Yeah.
And part of that is the result of shareholder engagement. If you are a shareholder, you have the right to vote in to speak up and say, you know, I hope we are going more in this direction. I mean, that's how companies remain accountable, is through shareholder engagement. That's another way that you can move the needle a little bit, is by staying involved and keeping tabs. Because if these companies, you know, with shareholder engagement, they could probably do with a lot of stuff, you know, acting in the dark. So keeping them accountable and being engaged with them is a key part of why I think they're starting to direction, because people have been speaking up.
So that's an interesting thing to put into your calculation of what you want to invest in, right? Because if you invest in the intention to,
absolutely,
right? Like that gives you at least a voice. Yeah. Okay. So it does sound like that there are challenges with this, right? But also some opportunities. So what are some of these key issues that we can that we need to look out for? The challenging parts, and then what are the cool opportunities? How do we do this if like you know, I know personally, I just put my money in and don't look at it. Like I don't think about it. So I should probably open that up. So tell me what I'm supposed to do.
So that's the exciting part about all of this, is that it's not just get rid of the bad guys, it's good guys, and where can we to make this really, you know, wonderful.
Can I ask you to just move your mic over?
And so I read something from a fund company that actually in Europe, and they're buying investments all over the globe, and they are a sustainable, particularly environmental. Said that their statement, but they were thinking that we have a $50 trillion investment potential between now and then, just in terms of money that should be invested in solar, wind, expanding, you know, electricity grids, water infrastructure. There are so many great technologies that are being developed in all parts of the world to address the things that we're, you know, the circular economy, which includes waste management. There are so many things that are being looked at, you know, biofuels and treatment, water treatment and reduced water usage, and the meters that are going to be needed to have a smart home where you don't use so much electricity. I mean, it's the the investments that are being made today all over the world. Not all of them are investable by you and I at this moment, but they're, you know, towards that. And when they get to scale, and many of them, there, you know, are things today that we can buy that are, you know, absolutely investable. You know, there are almost unlimited opportunities in all different areas. So it's fantastic. We're at I think we'll look back to this part of, you know, the 2020 being a huge action point in great, you know, improvement. We all know it has to happen, and the people that are not interested, you know, being part of it are sadly going to be left behind. That's right. It is going to cost more money if you're not known. You can't prove that you're a sustainable. There are all kinds of places where this is going to hit your bottom line if you're not prepared, and in all kinds of areas. So it's really not just about doing the right thing. There's so many opportunities to participate in new technologies.
Well, and just anecdotally, I just think there's such a huge appetite for it. I mean, certainly, really, it's not, I don't care, put me in an index and leave me alone. It's, don't put me in X, Y, I absolutely, if anything, we have to coach them about that no pure perfect companies bit, because they're so gung-ho to where it's going to make a difference, which I just think is so great, because again, for young investors who hopefully will be here for a long time, they're worried about the state of things, and as well. So it's really great to see such, again, a ravenous appetite for these kinds of investments and this kind of screening.
Well, I have to, you guys are just making me so encouraged and hopeful, because often I feel like, oh, we're doing so much individually, like if only we could get the corporations, they're the ones that have all the power, and what are they doing? And you're like, no, everyone's going to be left behind.
It's absolutely happening.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Well, let's talk about the young people some more. What about, and not just young people, category, barely have resources to invest, right? Or have such limited resources. What can they do to help move us toward this more? How can they contribute?
Well, I just think as consumers, when you buy products at the grocery store, and as you make purchases, it's important to, again, figure out what is important to you, and then get curious, do a little bit of research into the companies that you're most usually supporting. And just do a little digging and see if they have anything stated on their websites or on their documents about the initiative, more of an informed consumer, because the whole point with our money, we vote with our dollar. Put our money counts, and whether you're an investor or not, I'm just general everyday purchases. So being just a slightly more informed consumer, I think is such a wonderful thing to do, but also, writing to your representatives and talking to your and asking them the questions and seeing what they have, again, using your voice and your vote, I think is really important, because we might not, of us are able to, again, decide where everyday purchase.
Anything to that, Jen?
No, I mean, that absolutely important. We can have a voice. It's important that, again, you can find out a lot of information, by looking at the website, look at news items about a company and have they had, issues, and how they addressed them, and there are lots of ways that you can find out. Other things that I think anybody can consider is if you do have a pension plan, and you probably know what they invest in, worth looking at, because, for example, there was in Australia who's a cancer doctor, and she, like most people, and like we in Canada, a piece of her paycheck every month went into a government pension plan, like our equivalent of CPP. And she discovered, sort of accidentally, that one of the companies that her pension plan invested in was a big tobacco company. And here she spends all her time, tobacco, from lung cancer, et cetera. So she start going around the world and speaking to the people decisions at pension plans, like the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan and the CPP board, and to say mission is tobacco-free portfolios, and look under the hood and at the very make sure you're participating in this, that you don't have a choice in not putting your money in the CPP, for example, if you're working, but that by enough people, and I'm not 100% they are tobacco free. I think they might be at this point. Okay, this is something that, again, pension plans and the funds that people invest in, mutual funds and so forth, to be truly sustainable, most of the time they have to be actively funds. They can't be just passive index, because nobody is calling the shots on buy this, sell that. These guys aren't doing their bit. So, one of the reasons why passive index investing is generally effective for care about sustainable investing. You need to have active management, whether it's through a mutual fund or in some way where people are actually calls on what you hold and what you invest in.
So you have to management
Yes.
too, right? Because you want them to hold your kind of value,
Exactly.
be following through the same way
That's
we
right.
want the companies to follow through. A lot of
That's
like.
right.
That's right.
Which is probably what you want with your finance. So absolutely.
Yeah.
You will find a lot of global funds which are popular right now, and are something that a company is obliged to pay, but that especially mature companies tend to pay if they are profitable. And many people want, especially if they're retirees and they need that income. So what do tobacco companies do? They pay they tend to find themselves, they're taken up by a lot of mutual funds that want to pay dividends. So if you care about that, or any other company that you're happy with, you need to lift the lid, or you need to be, and you can do this online. You can look at, mutual fund and find out what the top 10 holdings are, or all of the holdings. Now, these change, but in general, you'll get a sense of, will they ever hold tobacco companies? If that's not what you want, then you need to have a sense of, and more companies are becoming very sensitive to this.
Yeah, it sounds like so as the next generation
Yes.
is looking to put their money in, and they're
Absolutely.
saying, no, we don't want this, and we do want
That's
that.
right. That's right. And I mean, you can achieve these through, even if you're using I think there's portfolios that are ESG, but certainly having an advisor, I think, is that, the added benefit of being able to speak to a human being and say, this is what's important to me, want or don't want, and have somebody advocate for you in that way too. I think is a bonus of having an. You can achieve this with. It just takes a little bit more individual research and doing a bit of homework. Yeah.
Now it's time to have to say all of this research, but it's worth it, right? That's part of the work, right?
That's right.
Well, one my question. Anything else you guys wanted to say before we turn to the Q&A?
I think what I would just, it's actually being a sustainable investor is a more exciting place to be than ever before. There's so much going on. There are so many opportunities, and it's just a tremendous place to be at this point. There's money to be made, and there is a better world to be had, and the two are not mutually exclusive, that's for sure. So, we're very excited to be focusing on this.
I appreciate that, because I remember we were talking about a title for this, and I came up with a really radical title, right? I said, "Can money save the planet?" Everybody's like, "Okay, that's a little dramatic," and I'm like, "I'm kind of a little bit of that makes sense." But I came up with this title, and I think it's back around here: "Putting your money where it is." And I love that this is now really opened up what that means. That we have an opportunity right now. Say it's not just, like you said, it's not just excluding, it's literally putting your heart in that.
Right.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to add?
I echo that. I think it's a because again, it is easy to get wrapped up in the doom and gloom of everything we hear about how we're not achieving, and be, you know, pretty anxiety inducing. But then, you know, you just read a couple of reports from these companies that are genuinely trying their best to, again, move the needle in the right direction. And it doesn't take long for me to feel like, oh, okay, you know, there are brilliant minds behind this that are working so hard to, again, just move us in the right direction. And it's easy to get excited about the impact that, again, following the money, your heart is, I think, is really a deeply reassuring thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure it reduces
Absolutely.
right, because there's
For
so
sure.
much right now, you know, right now, as we're having this, if people in the future, this is the day that it's been reported that there's these terrible floods in Valencia, Spain, right? Your heart goes out, you say, what can I do? And just doing this, I think is okay. I'm not only am I doing something, but I'm not alone.
That's right.
Other people are doing things too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because there's, you know, we can recycle our hearts, and that's, you know, that certainly makes a difference. But again, it's easy to feel like, feel a little hopeless. There's nothing I can do to match the scale of the problem, but in fact, there is.
There is. We can contribute our part.
Contribute
our part, whether it's in investing or whether it's voting and advocating and really getting involved and saying what we want from, like you said, sides. From all sides. It's going to take all of us doing all of our part. Us doing everything.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right.
That's right.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for the chat. Fantastic. And we're at 8 o'clock. Look at that. It's like they figured it out. I'm going to take the mic and put it up here so that we can have questions from the audience. And again, if you are online, please to go ahead and put a question in the chat. Like I said, by the magic, here comes the report that I see from online, but there could be, so please go ahead and write your questions.
First of all, a comment before I young people do, because they don't. One thing a lot of young people need are borrowing. So look at Cathedral is one of the things you can do, because some companies are better than other ESG factors. So that's a suggestion for the younger folk. But I'll use a specific example to sort of bring the thing out. Keep track of changing moods as to what is not. Take, for example, the future. Then there was a tsunami in Japan, and the fell out of the investing in uranium. Back saying, well, the advantage of is no carbon. There's the long-term storage problem. So how do you assess changing moods in terms of what is good and what is bad?
Well, it's a great question, Sandy, because, and that's just it, it's complicated, it's changing all the time. So all I can tell you is that, you know, I read several newsletters every day, I listen to the investing news all the time, try to keep on top of all of these changes. And the new technologies that are making some of these things, like you said, you know, how nuclear was out of favor and now becoming more favorable, in part because of the technologies that are being developed with smaller reactors that can be built more quickly, and also dealing with the sort. There's a lot. I can tell you that's one of the reasons it's a full-time job for me to keep on top of it. Do on individual situations and refer to them often to get their take on. It's very fluid, certainly. Yeah.
So
That's right.
Thanks for the word about borrowing. Did you guys want to say anything about that?
Well, I would say too, yeah, we've talked a lot about investing as, equity investors buying, you have an ownership component, but there's also the whole borrowing money where, you may be buying bonds that are by a company and so forth. And again, because there is more demand for it and measure, there is a growing green bond an opportunity, and like a bank loan money for a specific project, and they, based on it being a green project, they have to use that money for that purpose. There's no, multiple choice here. It has to be used for that purpose. So that is a very growing, it's a big growing area. It is something that is also very exciting.
Okay. I'm just going to look and see what I've just got something from the chat. Somebody said the sound is not. Perhaps I missed. I heard the speaker say active management achieves better than passive index funds. And we see the research on that. So can you pull a bit more too to make sure? There we go.
Well, what I was mostly saying is, if you care now, there's an ongoing argument about whether there aren't fees involved, they're always going to be have a better return than money that is managed by an active manager who is going to take a fee. That is the case. I guess what I'm saying is that there is a reason to support that over the long run, investments in sustainable investments generally outperform investments where that is screened. And my point about active management is that somebody has to do this, and so that speaks to the active management component. If you just want to buy index funds and don't care what's going on underneath,
right,
it means nothing changes. It's just they go up and down as the market goes up and down. Nobody is making any in terms of what you're holding. Then you may outperform a given that is in the same area by a little bit because there aren't fees being paid.
Right.
But if you care about under the hood, then you need to, for the most part, have people who have money, and they're going to pay for it. But in the long run, it should still be better because companies that are being purchased and are held for the long term are going to outperform,
index.
It's not actively managed.
Got it. So it's not that. So way of saying that is just monetary outcome you're looking for. Although if that's what you're looking for, it could be better in the long term. But you're talking about having the full outcome.
Exactly.
Right. You're going to have not just the return on your investment financially, but the return on your investment.
Exactly.
In its impact.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that. Great question in the chat. Thank you so much. So what else have
come up and ask this? You've mentioned banks. Banks give money to
Yes.
the oil companies.
Yeah.
How do we get around that? And also perhaps continue talking about credit unions as well. How that might be another way for young people to move their money a little bit better.
Well, absolutely. I mean, obviously, our big Canadian banks, traditionally, I mean, they have most businesses in the country, fossil fuel and otherwise. And for the reasons we talked about before, fossil fuel companies are not necessarily, all evil, and they do need money to continue doing a lot of what they do. They're all involved in, lending money to companies too, and they are issuing green bonds, and they are absolutely doing all that. So it's just, if you don't want to include Canadian banks in your portfolio, you don't have to. There are lots of other places to invest that, you know, will be fine. But it's just to say that the Canadian banks don't just lend to fossil fuel companies, and I think that it's more about, you know, over time, those companies will not going to be, you know, using their wealth for greener and lower carbon future. I mean, one of the things that many of them are investing in is carbon capture, which is a technology that hopefully, while they are still creations, they are to get rid of or at least store them so that they're not detrimental to the air and so on. So there are so many things that are being done. It does take money to do borrow money. So, you know, you can, of course, choose not to use banks. Banks are also funding a lot of the green projects for the future as well.
I still worry about Suncor and things that many of those oil companies are getting out of sustainable things.
Well,
so be careful because
it also has to do with the price of oil. When the price of oil gets low enough, they can't function, and difference too. That's part of what makes the difference, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Rose. Sorry, just
I have a question. I was actually asked by my 11-year-old son, John. Okay. Saving because he helped me doing a lot of family chores, also given by grandparents. And today he asked me to ask you a question. He asked for the younger generation, how could they manage their money by to see are growing and do not waste money and spend money wisely. Question is, do you compare your investment by example, if you put your money by real estate market, like you buy houses, etc., or money on the stock market, funds, credit union, how do you compare these two kinds of investments? Thank you.
So Rose, first of all, I think it's great that your son is so great. It is difficult to start with a mutual fund. And I think the best thing for him to do, or any novice investor, is to become more educated. There are places you can, do some unbiased education online and so on. One of the best sources, and we have a sheet that we're going to make available. One of the Ontario Securities Commission has a really great site called GetSmarterAboutMoney.ca. Information that is written in very straightforward language about investing, saving, borrowing money, how not to get caught up in financial scams, all kinds of things. It's a great website. So that would be anybody to just learn more. That's a really good place to go, because then when you get what we call, the shelves, you build, put the information, you start to get to understand a little bit better. You can start small with, a mutual fund, perhaps carefully selected to make sure that it's, got, a lens of sustainability. Lots of choices.
You said he's 11?
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
I was also going to say too, yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say exactly what you said, but I think because it's not, you know, financial literacy is not taught in school,
No.
he will subject matter, finding reasons to, maybe when he's a little older, to just understand the basics of, again, how these things work, so that he's less inclined to, again, give his money to somebody and say, I don't care, you know, make me money. Be a little bit more inclined to be, again, an informed investor, and more inclined to, again, isolate investments that are trying to do better in the world. So starting with a little education, I think, is absolutely, the resource that you just mentioned is absolutely great. And I think also young learners, khanacademy.org, I've been using that since I was 11. A plethora of subject matters, but they have financial literacy, young folks. And it's you, but I think the principles are applicable to anybody. So another good resource to maybe offer to him.
And I think the second part of your question had to do with how do you decide where to, you know, do you save for a house or do you save for, was that the second part? Do you decide how to allocate it? And it's, you know, when you're, especially when, again, an awful lot of places, you know, you're going to feel pulled to allocate your very scarce funds. You know, even as starting out, I think it's important that you consider putting a budget together and also looking at sort of a longer term plan. There are online help with, you know, fundamental budget, financial planning, you know, resources that, again, it's I think Get Smarter About Money might even have some financial planning.
Yes, tools, calculators.
And also, and what we also discovered just recently, the CRA website, CRA or just the Government of Canada? It was the Government of Canada, has a terrific budgeting tool.
Yes.
Which is, you know, interactive, fantastic. Like you would not know that, but we did a test drive.
Yep.
So budget tools, you know, Google budget tools and Government of Canada, and there's a very good budget spreadsheet that's interactive, that's really
user-friendly.
Really user-friendly. So there are people, investors, for all of those things.
And there's, you know, there might be a case to be made too that if you know, want to start your investment and also save for a house. I mean, there are first home savings accounts now where you can do just that. You're, you know, getting your toe in the water in terms of getting, you know, putting money for the future. And these first home savings account offer quite a few incentives to help you get there. And should you decide that, you know, you're happy to be a renter, you can transfer that to a retirement savings account too. So you can save for a house and also kind of learn, again, if you've got retirement savings. So there are kind of ways to do both as well.
Thank you. And mentioning that there's a handout. So when we leave here today, please be sure and pick up that handout. She's got lots of resources on it, websites, different websites. View online. I don't know. We can put some of that into the chat later once we've converted this live stream into a. Maybe we can put some information there.
For sure.
Any questions from anybody out there on the web or here in the room? Okay. Back at the mic.
You talked earlier about the three factors and governance. You've not really talked that much about governance. So what kinds of things you're looking at? I mean, I know that as someone who's held shares, I get the and I look at the voting things, and that's sometimes when I make a decision, I'm going to do this because I don't like what I'm seeing. What are you looking for?
Well, so some of the things that they consider under the governance would be things like differential between the CEO's pay and the average employee, for example. Are the board members shareholders? Are the owners shareholders? So, sitting on the same side of the table, you have a vested interest in following through and accountable and so on. If you don't hold many shares in the company that you oversee, it might be a bit, that's the sort of thing that we would, have a look at. I mean, those kinds of things. I'm just trying to think of some other things that would be most obvious. Again, following through on goalposts or that in different are important. Yeah.
Responsibility also falls under that. Knowing that the products that you are putting your name behind are actually safe for communities and for individuals. And because I think what we haven't mentioned too much is that it's typically it's about shareholders, and those shareholders are expensive. I think the whole ESG framework takes into account the stakeholders, your employees and your communities in which businesses operate, and just again making sure that who is associated with the product or the service is being thought of in terms of impact.
Do you look at things like turnover among directors, or where you have a bunch of people who've been entrenched for a long time, and also closeness of...
Right. Those things, of course, can have an impact on, the effectiveness of the board making decisions, for sure.
Having women on the board, people of color on the board, is certainly a governance issue. I mean, there's a little bit of overlap with social governance in that way, but certainly making sure that your board members, people they're servicing, I think is a big G factor.
Because companies that generally have diverse boards and, hire from of their traditional, who sort of situation, and in the long run, that usually means that be more profitable than if it's the same people, internally making the same kinds.
Ground for confirmation may feel differently than you.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you. Different room.
Really a question. That's why I've been. But I was so glad to hear you speak. I'm curious, find out what's going on, and then you also mentioned complain and write letters, right, and advocate. And one example that our group's been working on has been the CPP, the Canada Pension Plan. In fact, there's a group called Shift Action that investigates all the pension plans.
Right.
And we happen to have a bunch of postcards.
Oh, good.
So people can just fill in and send to the CPP board. Because
Excellent.
that board, they are investing heavily in fossil fuels. So they're really using our money, right, to...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rose. That's wonderful.
That's great.
Great.
Get a chance to use them. Thank you for that.
Yes, that's right.
So Rose just said for folks online, because she are pension plans that do not use fossil fuels.
As a matter of fact, the Church of England pension plan was one of the first to be fossil fuel free. They did that a few years ago. I found that quite interesting, that they have made it a point to not invest in fossil fuels going forward. Yeah.
Here comes Don. Yes, Don.
One of the things where my heart is with the people who in other parts of the world dealing with flooding and drought and fires, And my heart really goes out to those who are suffering, largely attributed to the climate crisis.
Yes.
Now, we know that our church deals with an investment company who has in its investment fossil fuels. Is it reasonable to try to ask them to divest from those investments? Is it better for us to look for other that doesn't?
Well, it's a
Question.
It's a really great question, and that is, sort of what's been going on. The issue of engagement by of individuals, portfolio managers, and so forth, to insist that if they are going to hold fossil fuels in their fund, that they have to meet certain standards and they have to gradually get out of it, or the threat is that they will divest from the fund. They will take the fossil fuel companies out. Now, again, with any given management company, I think I know what you're talking about. They have funds to choose from, and to some extent, it'll be on the part of investment sees the investments within the portfolio, and if they're not happy with the way X, Y, Z professional management is managing then they can fire that manager. I mean, that's another thing so it's the investment committee that oversees the pension fund that ultimately can decide whether to hire that company or that fund company and so on. And it's not just with the portfolio manager. And at the end of the day, that's what the investment managers of the fund itself, the pension fund, they make that decision whether that matters enough to them to get rid of the fund manager. Yeah.
Thank you. Good question. Good answer. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. Do we have any other questions in the room or any? Oh, here comes Sandy again.
That's great. That's great. Sandy.
Yeah, great question, Sandy.
Yeah.
In terms of social, you've talked about social. How do you keep track of companies, particularly when they're offshoring a lot of their things? I think, some of the people making fabrics, for example, in countries where it's basically close to slave labor.
Yeah.
But how do you keep track of social? What goes into the social component?
That's a great question too. Yes, the social component it certainly does. Supply chain, like you're talking about, where you can have you have your product, but how product and what components from and how have they been derived, and has child labor been used? That's a social consideration. The supply chain aspect of especially offshore or foreign companies is that looking more deeply into the way the
Thought about the example of Joe Fresh with that question. I think it was 10 years, 2014, when the place where they were making the fabrics in Bangladesh, the whole building, because there was plenty of warning signs that people execs decided not to worry about, and so many lives were lost. And I read a report at least every year about new things that Joe Fresh, or I suppose the law corporation, has done to make sure that never happens again. And I don't think it should take these horrible disasters for companies to wake up, but certainly as a result of that, I think consumers completely boycotted Joe. I certainly did. because I was so appalled, and I was a university student in global development learning about how this is not a unique situation, and just putting, again, the pressure on these companies to do better, because nobody wants to hear about these horrible events happening next door or on the other side of the world. So certainly the social issues, I think, mental issues tend to generate the most outrage when these horrible things happen. And I think it's just great that people have been speaking up and saying, never again, and looking at other companies and seeing, so what are you doing to make sure that this never happens? So just putting the pressure on, and just...
I have screening tools that I use to look at individual companies across North America that do at a lot of social components like that, and you know, and they look at things like you know, against for not, you know, for lack of safety in the products that they make, and you know, to the extent, it's one thing to have the problem, at the extent to which they deal with it and ensure it's not going to happen. Not only is it a PR nightmare when it happens, which often affects the share price at the time, but also it's a matter of, is this just going to become, you know, a business expense, you know, paying lawsuits to solve this problem or get rid of the problem? Or are we earnestly trying to make sure this never happens again and, you know, move forward? So those kinds of things are absolutely, and that information can be usually available through publicly available news reports and so forth, and that's what, you know, the due diligence that goes on behind the scenes to look at an individual investment to see whether they've had any kinds of issues or controversies, or, you know, how have they dealt with those things. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're right at the end of this, and I just heard from Jen, who's working our live stream, that she is currently typing those links that you recommended into the chat.
Great.
So if you're watching online and want to see what those links are, they are being typed in right now. So hang on, and you'll be able to see those wonderful resources. I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful. We can continue our conversation over coffee and cookies over there. Don't forget the handout. And this was such a hopeful conversation for me. I honestly didn't realize how good I was going to feel coming out of this. I am so grateful to you both for really enlightening me, and I hope everybody here online to give us a path forward so that we can.
Great.
So, grabbing the mic here and closing us off.
Ginny and Emily, as Monica has said, it's been an evening for me filled with hope.
Good.
Deirdre Pike is our social justice coordinator for the diocese, and she talks about the 4 pillars in terms of justice issues: prayer, education, advocacy, and I'm going to have to. Yeah. And I think we've heard this evening that you certainly us there are in terms of taking a more responsible or sustainable approach to investing. You talked a bit about advocacy, shareholder engagement, which I think is like a really important dimension in sustainable investing, and to consider as well. And I think one of the practical actions if we have funds to invest, to look at how those funds are invested. So it's been a very encouraging, and I hadn't realised that there'd been so much of a shift in the financial services industry in the past, 10 or so years. I mean, it sounds as though you kind of got in on the ground floor, or you were one of the early adopters